These shocking historical photos were found only recently. Write your opinion about them in the comments. In 1995, 15-year-old Nicole van den Hurk disappeared while cycling to work in Eindhoven, and her case stayed unsolved for years. Her stepbrother later made a false confession only to force DNA testing, and that desperate move helped expose the real suspect. Poland, 1939. Women cleaned and checked captured rifles while German forces moved deeper into the country. They worked with basic tools in cramped rooms, preparing every usable piece of equipment for a defense effort under extreme pressure. En Loc, 1972. A South Vietnamese soldier checks a North Vietnamese tank after American heavy bombers broke the armored push toward the city. The battle lasted for months and became a major test for South Vietnam after most American ground troops had left. Kharkiv, 1932 to 1933. An armed guard stood outside a grain store while the door marked seed reserves for 1934. During the Holodomor, grain was protected for state quotas as millions of Ukrainians faced severe hunger. Acre, May, 1948. Palestinians waded through the sea with children and belongings as they left the city. Some carried furniture on their backs because boats became one of the few ways to escape the fighting. St. James, Belfast, 1987. An Irish Republican Army member holds a rifle beside terraced houses while locals stand nearby under umbrellas. Only a few steps separate the armed man from the pedestrians, showing how close daily life and conflict were during the Troubles. Cape Adare, 1899. Karsten Borchgrevink's team built the first human structures in Antarctica and used them as a base for the winter. The two huts still stand today, making this one of the oldest surviving traces of human life on the frozen continent. Bengkalis, Dutch East Indies, around 1921. A Chinese laborer sits restrained beside cut timber under colonial rule. His thin frame and tied hands reveal the harsh control used over migrant workers in remote labor camps. On June 7, 1944, an injured soldier evacuated from Normandy smiled from a hospital train with one arm in a sling. These trains moved injured men from the coast to hospitals, while the Normandy operation was still unfolding. On June 6, 1944, an American soldier left a chalk message on his tent before joining the first Allied landings in Normandy. It read, "Sorry Jean, had to go, Johnny," naming the woman he left behind and the sudden order that sent him to France. London, 1965. A 23-year-old Libyan officer walked through the city in traditional dress while attending military training in the United Kingdom. 4 years later, he would become Libya's leader, making this street scene an unusually early look at a future ruler. In 1926, Italy's leader posed beside a bust made to copy his own stern profile. That same year, his government tightened one-party control, while statues and portraits built his public cult. On October 13, 1944, Lieutenant General George Patton pinned the Silver Star on Private Ernest Jenkins of New York City. Jenkins received it for brave actions during the liberation of Châteaudun, France, only weeks after Allied forces pushed inland from Normandy. In June 1965, Ed White became the first American to float outside a spacecraft when he performed a spacewalk during Gemini 4. He stayed outside for about 20 minutes, and the 4-day mission ended successfully on June 7, 1965. Berlin, spring 1945. A Soviet soldier pulls a German soldier from a manhole during the final battle for the city. In the last days of the war, sewers and cellars became hiding places and escape routes for defenders trapped inside Berlin. Omaha Beach, June 6, 1944. Injured men of the 16th Infantry Regiment waited below the chalk cliffs after the first assault. Many were evacuated from the same beach they had just crossed, with bandages applied before field hospital transport. In August 1989, 2 Soviet MiG-29 fighters flew to Canada for the Abbotsford Air Show during a rare thaw in Cold War relations. American F-15 jets from Alaska escorted them, while the Giant and 225 cargo aircraft traveled with the Soviet team out of frame. Moscow, February 1937. Joseph Stalin helped carry the funeral bier of Sergo Ordzhonikidze, his Georgian ally and Soviet heavy industry chief. Ordzhonikidze died during a tense purge era, making this public display of loyalty far more loaded than a normal state funeral. On June 6, 1944, First Lieutenant Jimmy Monteith from Virginia landed near Colville-sur-Mer with the first assault waves. He crossed open ground again and again to organize soldiers and guide tanks forward, later receiving the Medal of Honor for his leadership. Vietnam, 1967. A South Korean soldier from the White Horse Division lies in position with a machine gun during the war. South Korea sent tens of thousands of troops to Vietnam, making it one of the largest Allied forces beside the United States. Wyoming, 1892. Nate Champion was surrounded in a cabin during the Johnson County War and held off about 50 hired armed men. The siege became a key moment in the fight between powerful cattle interests and smaller ranchers on the open range. Iraq, 2003. Saddam Hussein inspected a slingshot as his government prepared for the American invasion. Within weeks, Baghdad fell, and this strange scene became one of the oddest images from the final days of his rule. Los Angeles, 1986. Afghan refugees protested with signs demanding Soviet forces leave Afghanistan. The rally showed how the Soviet-Afghan War had followed displaced families across the world, even into American streets. Les Forges, Normandy, June 1944. Covered American paratroopers lay beside a village road after the airborne landings near Sainte-Mère-Église. The quiet scene shows the cost of securing the roads and crossroads behind Utah Beach before the main Allied advance. Miami, October 18, 1946. Estonian refugees arrived aboard the yacht Linda after fleeing Soviet control of their homeland. Their small boat carried people who had crossed the Atlantic rather than return to an occupied Estonia. China around 1940 to 1943. A Chinese soldier covers himself with branches and carries an Arisaka Type 38 rifle with a fixed bayonet. This kind of field camouflage helped him blend into grass and brush during the long war against Japan. Birkenhead around April 1950. A newspaper boy walked his route below the giant hull of the aircraft carrier Ark Royal. The ship was being built at Camel Laird, placing an ordinary street directly under one of Britain's biggest post-war naval projects. Berlin, 1936. More than 600 kayaks jammed inside a lock on the River Spree on the way to a canoeing event. Crowds watched from above as the narrow canal turned into a packed traffic jam made entirely of paddlers. South London, October 1940. A double-decker bus drove into a large crater above Balham Station during blackout conditions. Everyone aboard survived, even though the front of the bus dropped deep into the broken road. Beijing, June 23, 1989. Shanghai Mayor Jiang Zemin appeared as the new leader of the Chinese Communist Party after weeks out of public view. His rise began a new era in China, led by officials with engineering backgrounds and strong control over rapid modernization. Rome, June 5, 1944. Allied troops displayed the Italian flag from the balcony of Palazzo Venezia after the city was liberated. It was the same balcony once used for major fascist speeches, now turned into a public sign that the regime had lost Rome. Ottoman Empire, 1916. Ahmed Ali Effendi served as a military pilot when powered flight was still a young technology. He is widely cited as the first black pilot, placing him at a rare crossroads of early aviation and Ottoman military history. In 1899, Marshal Major Taylor raced at a velodrome in the same year he became world cycling champion. He was one of the first black athletes to win a global title, breaking into a sport that was still deeply segregated. Berlin, June 3, 1945. A German civilian stood on Unter den Linden, facing a huge Soviet portrait of Stalin. The street had only recently fallen under Allied control, and the display showed how fast Berlin's symbols changed after the war. On June 5, 1944, British paratroopers of the 6th Airborne Division posed at Royal Air Force Harwell with their toy mascot Pegasus. Hours later, men from this division would land in Normandy to secure key bridges before the main beach landings. Haiti 2010. A cholera outbreak was later linked to waste from a United Nations peacekeeper camp entering local water. The disease spread fast through communities with limited clean water, and around 10,000 people lost their lives. Bikini Atoll, May 21, 1956. The Cherokee test released 3.8 megatons from an air-dropped thermonuclear device. It was the first United States airdrop of this type, detonated about 1,300 meters above the Pacific. El Paso, 1938. An elderly woman waited on the sidewalk with her bundles for the streetcar back to Mexico. Behind her, a shop window advertised boys' pants for 50 cents, a small detail that makes the border scene feel painfully real. In 1955, 15-year-old Claudette Colvin refused to give up her bus seat in Montgomery, 9 months before Rosa Parks. Her case later helped challenge bus segregation in court, making her one of the youngest key figures in the movement. Parihaka, New Zealand, November 5, 1881. More than 1,600 troops and volunteers entered the Maori settlement in western Taranaki. The village was known for non-violent resistance, making the show of force one of New Zealand's most important colonial confrontations. Italy, 1932. Benito Mussolini aimed a Modello 1891 rifle to open a national shooting competition during the fascist decennial. The event marked 10 years since the March on Rome, when pressure from his movement helped make him prime minister. Liberia, 1997 to 2003. Charles Taylor ruled as president after rising from a war leader during years of regional conflict. An international court later sentenced him to 50 years for supporting armed groups in Sierra Leone, making him the first former African head of state convicted by that court. Mexico, late 1930s. President Lázaro Cárdenas stood with Spanish Civil War orphans after Mexico opened its doors to refugee children. In 1938, he also nationalized Mexico's oil industry, making him one of the most remembered leaders in the country's modern history. Sligo, Ireland, June 2009. A man checked into a hotel as Peter Bergman, then spent 3 days leaving with bags and returning without them. Days later, he was found on a nearby beach, and investigators learned his name, address, and identity were all false. Port Moresby, April 1942. Australian troops inspected a captured Mitsubishi, a 6M0 from Japan's Tainan Air Group. The wreck gave Allied forces rare early access to one of Japan's most feared carrier fighters. San Miguel, Bulacan, around 1942. Japanese soldiers taught local Filipino children the Japanese language during the occupation of the Philippines. The chalkboard mixed simple words with drawings, showing how schools were used to spread Japan's wartime control. A corsair drops into the sea near HMS Illustrious after losing control during a carrier landing approach. The incident shows how dangerous deck operations were, where another aircraft's slipstream could ruin a landing in seconds. In 1971, 17-year-old Julianne Kupski fell from a braking aircraft into the Amazon rainforest and survived the impact. With a broken collarbone and almost no supplies, she walked through the jungle for 11 days before finding help. Early 1900s, British sideshow performers Sue and Kaiser were promoted with false names and invented stories because showmen wanted them to seem more exotic. Away from the stage, they loved Bath, England, and became close friends with a schoolgirl named Barbara Walsh. Iowa, around 1974. A state trooper waited beside a long, open highway where drivers could build speed before seeing the patrol car. The empty hills made the trap simple because the officer could watch traffic from far ahead and stop cars after the rise. United States Prohibition era. Officials poured confiscated beer into the street after alcohol sales were banned from 1920 to 1933. The ban was meant to stop drinking, but it helped create hidden bars, smugglers, and scenes like this public dump. Around the 1920s, women could play basketball in high boots, layered clothing, and carefully styled hair. The outfit looks formal today, but it shows how early women's sports often mixed strict fashion rules with real athletic competition. Around the 1920s, Charleston dancers lined up for an endurance contest as jazz-age crowds watched from the floor and balcony. These contests could last for hours, turning a popular dance craze into a public test of stamina. In 1927, the pilot of the Spirit of St. Louis completed the first solo non-stop flight across the Atlantic. He flew from New York to Paris in about 33.5 hours, becoming one of the biggest aviation figures of the decade. In the 1920s, Louise Brooks made the sharp black bob one of the most famous hairstyles of the decade. Her blunt bangs and shortcut became linked with silent film fame, flapper style, and a new image of modern women. Paris, 1926. Josephine Baker debuted her famous banana skirt at the Folies Bergère with 16 rubber bananas and pearl necklaces. The performance made her a jazz-age star and turned one bold stage costume into a symbol of 1920s Paris. New York, 1920s. Choreographer Ned Wayburn measured the lineup of Ziegfeld Follies chorus dancers during rooftop practice. The group trained for exact spacing and synchronized kick lines, turning stage glamour into strict daily discipline. New York, Easter Sunday, 1929. Young women walked down Fifth Avenue and lit cigarettes in a planned protest called Torches of Freedom. The stunt challenged old rules about women smoking in public, but it was also carefully shaped by advertising men. In 1931, Al Capone was transported to prison after being convicted for tax evasion, not for his prohibition empire. The photo looks casual, but it shows the moment one of Chicago's most powerful crime figures was finally brought down through financial records. During the 1920s, United States Agriculture Secretary Howard Gore used a radio receiver as broadcasting was spreading into American homes. Radio quickly became the decade's new shared screen, carrying news, music, farm reports, and live voices across the country. In 1923, the clock scene from Safety Last became one of the most famous images of silent film. The actor was filmed above Los Angeles using a hidden platform and camera angle that made the drop look far higher. Chicago, 1927. Gene Tunney and Jack Dempsey fought in the famous long count fight before a huge boxing crowd. The match became legendary after Dempsey failed to move to a neutral corner, giving Tunney extra seconds to recover. New York, 1923. Yankee Stadium opened with more than 74,000 fans packed into the stands and even standing near the outfield. The huge crowd showed how baseball became a national obsession during the Babe Ruth era. New York, 1920. Women lined up at ballot boxes after the 19th Amendment gave them the vote across the United States. For many, this was the first national election where decades of marches, petitions, and public pressure finally became a real ballot. Atlantic City, early 1920s. Margaret Gorman became the first Miss America after a contest created to keep tourists in town after summer. She was not called Miss America at first. That title was added in 1922 when she returned to defend her crown. Chicago, 1928. Joe Hold'em Powers balanced on a flagpole during America's strange flagpole sitting craze. People competed to stay high above the street for days or weeks, turning boredom and risk into public entertainment. In the 1920s, vibrating slimming machines promised to shape the body by shaking it with electric motion. Devices like this slender tone were sold as modern beauty technology long before home fitness gadgets became common. London, 1926. John Logie Baird gave the first public demonstration of live television using a moving image of a dummy called Stooky Bill. The flickering image was sent between two rooms, proving that faces and motion could travel through a screen before television reached homes. New York, 1929. A worker sat on a steel beam during construction of the Chrysler Building. The tower was part of Manhattan's skyscraper race, built by crews working high above the city with almost no visible safety equipment. In 1928, the Protos turbo washer showed how electricity was entering ordinary housework, replacing washboards and hours of hand scrubbing with a powered drum. It looked bulky by modern standards, but machines like this began turning laundry from exhausting hand labor into a modern home routine. In 1928, some luxury fashion used whole leopard fur muffs as both a hand warmer and a status accessory. This woman's outfit shows how 1920s fashion could turn an extreme display of wealth into something meant for everyday public wear. August to November, 1944. South Africa's 31st Squadron flew long night missions from Italy to drop supplies into Warsaw during the uprising. The flights crossed occupied Europe at extreme range, making these crews one of the most important Allied aid sources for the Polish resistance. Kovno, Lithuania, around 1943. Photographer George Kadish recorded shoes left behind after a deportation action in the ghetto. His own caption, "The body is gone," turned the empty shoes into one of the starkest records of what was taken from the people there. Berlin, 1945. Soviet soldiers covered the Reichstag's stone columns with names, hometowns, dates, and short messages after the building was captured. The graffiti turned the entrance into a record of individual soldiers who reached one of the most symbolic places in the defeated German capital. Belgium, September, 1914. Families sat with small bags after the German invasion pushed civilians out of their towns. Many left with only what they could carry, turning railway stations and sidewalks into waiting rooms for people with no safe home to return to. Body, California, March 1911. Residents dug narrow paths through snow so deep it reached doors, windows, and rooftops. In the former mining town, people moved between buildings through carved snow walls while a dog stood above the buried street. On April 28, 1988, Aloha Airlines Flight 243 lost a large section of its upper cabin at 24,000 feet over Hawaii. The crew still landed the damaged Boeing 737 in Maui about 13 minutes later, turning the flight into a major case study in aircraft metal fatigue. South Dakota, 1973. American Indian Movement members held positions during the Wounded Knee occupation, a protest over tribal leadership and federal treatment of Native people. The standoff lasted 71 days and turned a small village into a national symbol of Native rights and broken promises. During the Civil War, James served with the 7th Michigan Cavalry from 1862 to 1865 across several campaigns. At Gettysburg, his unit helped hold East Cavalry Field against Jeb Stuart's attempt to strike the Union rear. Yale, 1966. George Walker Bush played rugby years before entering national politics and later becoming President of the United States. The rough college match shows a very different side of him, long before the White House and public office. Near Ufa, Soviet Union, June 4, 1989. 2 passenger trains passed through a leaked gas cloud from a nearby pipeline, and the sparks triggered a massive explosion. 37 railway cars were destroyed, and 575 people lost their lives, many of them families traveling to and from the Black Sea. Korea, early 1950s. Army nurse Sylvia Pavlovich worked inside the 82nd 09th Mobile Surgical Hospital of the United States 8th Army. The unit treated soldiers close to the front, using a dark tent hospital, hanging bulbs, and fast field surgery when every minute mattered. Gran Sasso, September 12, 1943. German commandos removed Benito Mussolini from a mountain hotel after Italy's king had ordered his arrest. The raid used gliders to reach the remote resort, and Mussolini was soon placed at the head of a German-backed state in northern Italy. Occupied France, 1940 to 1944. Allied bombers targeted railways, ports, and factories used by Germany. But French cities often paid the price. Historian Andrew Knapp estimated about 57,000 French civilians lost their lives, almost as many as Britain lost from the Blitz and V weapons combined. World War II, Eastern Front. Soviet soldiers rest among ruins while one keeps watch with a machine gun in a shattered position. The Soviet Union lost around 9 to 11 million service members in combat, far more than the United States and Britain combined. Netherlands, September 1944. Allied gliders landed troops and equipment behind German lines during Operation Market Garden. Britain used more than 2,500 engineless gliders in the Arnhem Offensive, but bad weather, failed radios, and strong German resistance broke the plan. In 1920, socialist candidate Eugene Victor Debs ran for president while imprisoned, and his campaign postcard showed him in prison clothing behind bars. He still received nearly 1 million votes, making this one of the most unusual campaign images in United States election history. Afghanistan, 1980s. Mujahideen fighters paused for prayer with their rifles laid out in front of them during the Soviet-Afghan War. The image shows how religion, local resistance, and daily battlefield life were closely tied together in the Mountain War. Coventry, 1957. A major fire at the Jaguar factory destroyed or damaged hundreds of cars inside the production halls. Workers still managed to save key equipment, and Jaguar restarted production quickly instead of letting the disaster stop the company. Volga River, 1899. Barge haulers pulled heavy boats from the riverbank with ropes fixed across their shoulders and chests. Even as steamships spread through Russia, this old labor system still survived in places where cheap human strength was easier to hire than machines. Paris, 1952. Police detained women linked to street prostitution and placed them inside a police van. One woman sticks out her tongue at the camera, while another turns away from the window during the public arrest. White House, 1848. 2 United States presidents and 3 first ladies posed together in one of the rarest early political photographs. It is one of only 2 known photos of the 4th First Lady, who died the next summer along with the sitting president. Alsace, 1944. A French soldier carried a baby through snowy woods as civilians fled the German advance during Operation Nordwind. The retreat showed how quickly families near the front had to leave, often walking through winter roads with soldiers moving beside them. Naples, 1890. Pizza maker Rafael Esposito prepared what is often called the first pizza ever photographed. He became linked to the Margherita pizza story after making a tomato, mozzarella, and basil version for Italy's queen. Shelbyville, Tennessee, 1934. Hundreds gathered outside the jail after a black teenager was accused in a serious case. Tennessee National Guard troops stopped the mob after tear gas failed, and 4 attackers died during the clash. Early 20th century. Peanut sellers wore suits covered with real peanuts to attract crowds and turn themselves into walking advertisements. The strange costume made the product impossible to miss, long before modern street marketing used mascots and giant signs. Germany, 1916. A school photo shows a future Nazi propaganda chief years before he entered national politics. The ordinary classroom portrait feels striking because the quiet student in the center later became one of the most powerful voices of the Third Reich. Woongool Ba, Australia, around 1920. 2 fishers posed with a huge cod beside their small boat after pulling it from the water. The size of the fish shows how rich local river and coastal fishing grounds could still be before modern pressure changed many catches forever. San Francisco, 1906. The earthquake ripped open the street and bent the streetcar tracks across a steep city hill. The broken rails show how the disaster damaged not only buildings, but the transport system people needed to escape and rebuild. Buffalo, 1901. Leon Czolgosz was photographed behind bars after attacking President William McKinley at the Pan American Exposition. The case shocked the United States and led Theodore Roosevelt to become president only months into McKinley's second term. Newcastle, England, 1873. A 15-year-old boy was photographed after being sentenced to 14 months of hard labor for stealing money. His mugshot shows how Victorian courts treated even young offenders with prison records, numbered files, and severe punishment. Britain, late 1880s. Victorian working women posed in heavy work clothes, with some wearing trousers for dirty industrial labor. Many women worked around mines above ground, sorting coal, moving tools, and doing jobs that looked nothing like the strict fashion rules of the era. In 1919, a tattoo parlor used hand-operated machines, wall flash designs, and a simple chair instead of modern studio equipment. Tattooing was still linked with sailors, workers, and show people, which made shops like this look more like hidden trade rooms than mainstream businesses. England, 1885. John Lee was sentenced for the Babbacombe case, but the prison trapdoor failed 3 times on the day he was meant to die. His sentence was changed to life imprisonment, and he later became known as the man they could not hang. Dachau, 1945. A man in prisoner clothing stands beside disinfection chambers used to delouse garments inside the concentration camp. The photo is often misused online, but it shows one camp facility, not a denial of the documented Nazi camp system. San Diego, 1915. Charles Hatfield claimed he could make rain with a secret chemical mix, and the city offered him $10,000 to end a drought. Soon after, heavy storms flooded the region, turning his strange weather experiment into one of California's most debated disasters. Early 20th century. Marie Curie worked with radium when its dangers were still poorly understood, often handling glowing samples without modern protection. Her notebooks and lab objects are still kept under special controls today because traces of radiation remain more than a century later. Cologne, early 20th century. Rosa Wedstead was advertised at the Panopticon as the tallest woman in the world. The men beside her were posed as a scale trick, making her height the entire attraction in an era of human curiosity shows. France, 1907. Waiters went on strike after many employers banned them from wearing mustaches while serving customers. At the time, a mustache was linked with status and respectability, so the rule became a fight over dignity, not just facial hair. Antarctica, 1914. Ernest Shackleton's endurance expedition was trapped in ice, forcing the crew to survive on frozen sea and remote islands for more than a year. Shackleton then crossed about 800 miles of ocean in a small lifeboat to find help, and every member of his crew survived. Vietnam, decades after the war, a guide emerged from a hidden Viet Cong tunnel to show how fighters could disappear under leaves and dirt. For veterans, this was not just a tourist trick, because these tunnels were part of one of the war's most stressful battlefield realities. Japan, 1938. Members of the Nichigeki dancing team performed for visiting Hitler Youth delegates during a staged cultural exchange. The photo shows how entertainment, youth groups, and public visits were used to display Japan and Germany's growing alliance before the war. Papua New Guinea. An abandoned indigenous treehouse rises high above the rainforest, built on tall trunks to keep people above insects, animals, and sudden ground danger. Homes like this are linked to forest communities such as the Korowai, where height once gave both safety and a clear view through the jungle. In 1949, Marilyn Monroe gave a radio interview while she was still building her career before becoming one of Hollywood's biggest names. The microphone marked WWSC, a small detail from the years when studios were still shaping her public image. Moscow, 1890s. Leo Tolstoy learned to ride a bicycle at age 67 and even received an official city permit for cycling. Scientific American later wrote that the famous writer amazed peasants near his estate by riding this new machine like a young man. Bloemfontein, 1900. Winston Churchill worked as a war correspondent in South Africa long before becoming Britain's wartime leader. He had recently escaped Boer captivity, making this camp portrait one of the early turning points in his public life. Disneyland, 1962. The Shah of Iran and Queen Farah visited the park with Walt Disney during an official trip to the United States. The scene links a royal state visit with the early global image of Disneyland, which had opened only 7 years earlier. United States, mid-20th century, a Citi Federal Savings Bank employee posed beside $1 million stacked in bundled cash. The pile shows how physical banking looked before digital transfers, when even a single large account could fill a whole table with bills. United States, 1900. Children sat in fixed wooden desks, while the teacher led lessons from the front of a crowded classroom. The room shows how strict early public schooling was, with rows, posture, memorization, and one teacher managing many ages at once. Sarajevo, September 14, 1992. A young Bosnian woman waited at Lion Cemetery with a rifle over her shoulder during the siege. Her cigarette, jacket, and tired expression show how quickly ordinary youth were pulled into the daily pressure of wartime Sarajevo. New York, 1919. The 369th Infantry returned home after World War I, smiling from the ship after months of service in France. Known as the Harlem Hellfighters, the Black Regiment spent more time in frontline duty than any other American unit of its size. Date and location unknown. Japanese soldiers posed with a small toy car, turning a military moment into an oddly playful scene. The image stands out because the uniforms and equipment clash sharply with the childish vehicle, showing a rare off-duty side of wartime life. Washington, 1990. Mikhail Kalashnikov and Eugene Stoner met while holding each other's famous rifle designs. The moment brought together the creators of the AK platform and the AR-style rifle, two weapons that shaped modern military history. Soviet Union, World War II. The Yakovlev Yak-9B looked like a regular fighter, but a hidden bay behind the pilot could carry small munitions. Most loads were about 200 kilograms, letting the aircraft hit ground targets while still keeping the speed and shape of a fighter. Qingtao, 1914. Japanese artillerymen worked around a heavy gun during the British-Japanese siege of the German-held port. The smiling crew stands beside a camouflaged firing position, showing the careful setup behind one of World War I's earliest Asian campaigns. Near Izbushensky, August 24, 1942. Italy's Savoia Cavalleria captured Soviet soldiers after one of the last major cavalry actions of World War II. The scene is unusual because horse cavalry, helmets, sabers, and modern frontline warfare briefly met on the same battlefield. Washington, 1983. Sculptor Frederick Hart finished the clay model for the three soldiers, created to stand near the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. He gave the figures detailed uniforms, tired faces, and different backgrounds, so the statue would represent the men who served, not an abstract idea of war. On the set of The Misfits, Marilyn Monroe hugged a child during a break from filming the drama released in 1961. The film became the final completed screen work for both Monroe and Clark Gable, making this behind-the-scenes moment especially rare. London, around 1946, South African and Southern Rhodesian troops marched together in the Victory Parade after World War II. The formation shows how Britain's empire and dominions were publicly honored in the capital after sending men to fight across several fronts. March 25, 1976. Muhammad Ali compared hand size with Andre the Giant during a meeting between two global sports icons. The moment looked almost unreal because the heavyweight champion suddenly appeared small beside the 7'4" wrestling giant. New York City, 1911. After the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, crowds gathered as investigators exposed locked exits and unsafe factory conditions. The disaster took 146 lives, mostly young immigrant women and girls, and helped force major changes in workplace safety laws. Amritsar, India, April 13, 1919. British troops fired on unarmed civilians gathered inside the walled garden of Jallianwala Bagh. The exits were difficult to reach, and the event became one of the darkest turning points in India's struggle against British rule. Cincinnati, 1979. 11 fans lost their lives outside a sold-out The Who concert after thousands pressed toward locked doors. Many thought the show had started, but the sound they heard was only a film trailer playing inside the arena. Write in the comments which photo you liked the most and for what reason.